From the Toronto Star, I'm Sabah Itazaz, and this matters. Where are the cool kids of the tech space currently hanging out? That is not the gram, TikTok, or Twitter. A new voice chat-based social media app called Clubhouse has been the talk of the town. Is it because it's currently by invite only, or because we need to hear the intimacy of each other's voices during the isolation of this pandemic, or because there's a star-studded guest list like Kid Cudi, Kevin Hart, and Elon Musk, who've all made appearances? Those who are hooked say it's all of the above. It's a charming combination of something that's a live panel but not quite, a podcast but not a podcast, and also the best way to connect and actually talk to others. But earlier this month, China blocked access to the app in the country, adding it to a list of thousands that the ruling party doesn't want the people to see. How did things turn political so quickly? And as the idea of voice-based social media catches on fast, do we need to talk about privacy and security concerns? On today's episode, the Star's Vancouver-based reporter Joanna Chu joins me to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Clubhouse. Hi, Joanna. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Sabah. Thanks for having me today.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is Clubhouse? Who came up with it? And why is everyone so excited about it? Is it because it's invitation only right now?
Well, I think partly the timing was really good. So it was actually a startup by two Silicon Valley types, and they started it in March last year. So obviously it wasn't planned, but it was just as everyone was getting home and locking down. And at first it was very exclusive. It was hard to get invitation. In the recent weeks, more invitations have been pouring out, but it's still iPhone only. So since the beginning, there's really kind of been like a buzz of like exclusivity, like what's this about? All these like celebrities started joining. And then a few weeks ago, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg just popped into the app to, do interviews, like just talk. And I think when two like tech icons show up to do the same new app for the first time, people are going to stand up and notice and be like, what's this about? So it's really exploded in the last few weeks. So I joined a few weeks ago. I guess I was just on the curve. I wasn't ahead of the trend. But as soon as I joined, I was kind of like, wow, this is what I want. Like, I'm sick of Zoom calls. Like, I don't want to brush my hair and put on even a proper shirt to like talk to people anymore. But I want to hear voices, because sometimes like the Twitterverse can get pretty draining because people often just miscommunicate. But with these audio-only chat rooms, it becomes a bit more of that intimacy I think people are craving. So it's really taken off in the last few weeks in many sectors, and including thousands of Chinese people jumping on the app.
I am also a fairly recent member of Clubhouse, shall we say, and it seems to be kind of reminiscent of the Yahoo chat rooms of back in the day. And yes, I'm clearly very old, but that's what it reminded me of. Can you tell us exactly how Clubhouse works? Is it kind of like that?
I sort of remember Yahoo chat rooms, but those were still like text, right? Like you type into the chat rooms.
Yeah, this is an audio version of that.
This kind of reminded me of that early stage of the social internet where you just talk to a bunch of strangers, and it's kind of like more flat. There's not like a field of celebrities and influencers and people with lots of followers. It's like they're audio chat rooms that are kind of like everyone's making a radio show together in a way, kind of participatory podcasts almost. So people have gravitated podcasts because it's more informal than radio in a way. But Clubhouse is more informal than that because it's completely live, completely unscripted. Anyone can start a room where they have a topic and have some speakers to start off. And then people join that room because the app's pretty good at notifying people when something's happening. And then anyone can listen and anyone can put up their hand to become a speaker. So you end up having these pretty interesting conversations where people you don't expect to speak will show up, like a famous Chinese artist, Ai Weiwei, has been popping up, or Elon Musk popping up. It's just, you don't know what will happen. I think that's kind of part of the appeal, because you enter a room, the topic seems interesting, and you don't really know how the conversation will go because it's very organic. It depends on just the mood of the room and who's there and who's willing to put up their hand and speak.
It's a very unique mix, like you said, of a podcast, phone call, and maybe a live panel with surprise celebrity appearances. So it's quite eclectic. And just yesterday, I happened to get into a room titled, "Was Joe from the Netflix series You Really a Psychopath or Just a Man in Love?" So that's just kind of the range of topics that are being discussed on there. Have you explored it much? What other kind of subjects have you seen being discussed there?
So like my interest is like foreign policy and politics. And so I would kind of spend maybe most of my time in those rooms. We could get to those later. But I think another room I got sucked into for hours was one about pandemic dating stories. So people were just sharing kind of their horror stories of dating during the pandemic. And then a dating coach was there kind of like commenting on it. And it felt like a kind of like a confessional, like Cosmo magazine, like what are your worst dating stories, except it was real people talking live about their real dating stories. And it just seemed really real. Like you were suddenly in like a brunch of a whole bunch of your girlfriends, but you've never met them before, but they're really open and genuine. So that was quite interesting too. So things like that, like it, basically now, since it's been quite a few months and there's more and more users, basically any topic you're interested in, you can find conversations there and you can start your own if you can't find one.
Right. And like you said, a fair mix of topics there. And from what I was reading, it seemed to be mostly tech industry people that were there on there a lot as well. And now you're talking about politics and you brought up China. How did China get involved? Did Clubhouse start getting political?
Yeah. So at first, I guess since it was a Silicon Valley startup and it's iPhone only, so I guess that's a certain subset of people. At first, it was like widely used mostly among tech workers in California. And the topics were about like, I don't know what tech people talk about, like startups and tech and new ventures or capital, whatever. You can tell I'm not in that world, but
Yeah, believe me, it's the same here. So
yeah. So it had that mood because that's what it seemed like most users were from that background. But I guess as a hype built in the last few weeks and last month, and I think really like after Elon Musk did that talk, is he actually interviewed someone about GameStop, which was like, you know, the big Reddit stock market story of last month. So it blew up and then people really wanted to know what was going on. And it included people from around the world, including China. So actually the app wasn't banned in China. Like many apps are banned in China. Twitter is, Facebook, a whole suite of Google products. I lived in China and really when I didn't have my VPN on to go through the great firewall of internet controls, the internet in China is nothing like the internet I get to experience now. So there's completely new like universe of apps in China that are allowed, that are highly censored by the Chinese government. But because it was a new app that people weren't really talking about yet in China, for a brief, like a few weeks, it was free and Chinese people could jump on and have conversations in English if they spoke English, or often Chinese with the diaspora, like people living in Taiwan, Canada, US, who spoke Mandarin, about suddenly like the elephants in the room in Chinese society, the really, really taboo, sensitive topics that you would get immediately censored for talking about on any other Chinese social media app. So things like the democracy protests in Hong Kong, the Taiwan mainland China relations, which have been quite strained, and even a group I was in talking for hours about the internment camps and discrimination and persecution of Uyghur people and minorities in Xinjiang.
We'll be right back. Since this app is audio, you can actually hear and feel more connected to people. Did that make for a more rare kind of communication for dissidents and independent voices in China, where there's a clampdown on that kind of freedom of expression? I can see how a platform like Clubhouse could become quite powerful in that context. And just like you mentioned, the strained relations between mainland China and Taiwan, and you said this was sort of a platform to connect people from both sides on the platform, right?
So it was amazing because when you're on Twitter and you see people from China tweeting in Chinese, these are often people who either think that they're so pro-government that they're safe to use kind of banned app, or the people who are so critical of the government that they are taking the risk of using a banned app and criticizing the government online in public. So you get kind of like the both ends of the spectrum from Chinese people, but you don't get like all the people in between who have like a diversity of views. So on Clubhouse, suddenly it was like not like veteran Chinese activists or academics. It was just a range of ordinary people, often very articulate people, very smart people with really interesting views, but they weren't the people you normally get to hear from on Western social media, you know? So there were these conversations. I think everyone knew it was a brief period that China was going to crack down, and China did shut down the Clubhouse app on February 8th. Some of them had disagreements with people from Taiwan or Hong Kong, for example. Some of them wanted to, in a sense, not completely defend, but try to like sort of soften or give like a softer view of what the Chinese government was doing. Some of them were actually giving testimonies of what it was like. A Uyghur lawyer was talking about what it's like in Xinjiang. So a whole gamut, and people were having a dialogue. So some people didn't change their minds and some people did. And some people said they learned new things because they got to hear from different people. So it was really amazing. And obviously, clearly something the Chinese government didn't want to see happening. So now it's not accessible at all. On China's version of Twitter, Weibo, you can't even type the word Clubhouse. So it's completely just scrubbed from the internet right now in China.
And this is just part of a wider crackdown on the internet by the Chinese Communist Party, as you were explaining before as well. Tell me more about how the digital space is controlled and monitored in China. I believe you talk about the Great Firewall in your piece.
Yeah, the Great Firewall, like it's the world's most advanced, sophisticated set of internet controls. I guess it started really early on, a couple of decades ago, blocking like main like human rights websites. And then it started with major newspapers that wrote more critical pieces of China, like the New York Times. And then it just kept growing and growing. Like anytime there was anything that was more free on the internet, it was a matter of time before it got shut down. So Instagram lasted a while in China until 2012 Hong Kong, the first wave of the protests, like the Occupy movement in Hong Kong. And then the images started being shared in China. So immediately, just a flip of a switch, Instagram was banned in China. So it's really easy, it seems, for now, for Chinese officials to just turn off an app, turn off a website access. And it's come to the point where it's not just like blocking thousands of websites. Now it's on the social media apps that Chinese people can use. There's really, really vigilant, sophisticated monitoring real time from machine AI. So there's been lots of tests like Toronto University's Citizen Lab has done tests where you try to send an image or a sensitive word of like a dissident to a fellow Chinese user, and it doesn't even go through, even if it's a one-on-one chat. So it's so sophisticated that it knows, it intercepts your messages that are sensitive, and it never even lands on the other side, you know? You basically assume that everything you write or even typing maybe is getting scanned, monitored, and censored.
Surveillance is a major element of that, which brings us to some of the problematic stuff. Now, Clubhouse is an app that's literally built around people dropping in on rooms and listening in on conversations. I actually attended a chat room by the founders who were talking about the fact that quietly listening and ghosting is actually encouraged sometimes. I understand the purpose for this platform, but this is also the very definition of surveillance, isn't it? If certain kinds of states were going to be doing that.
Yeah. So for this story, I wrote about actually a Toronto resident, Roger Huang, who is an immigrant from mainland China. And he helped start this first really popular China-focused club on Clubhouse. And it went from a few hundred members and followers at first to now it's like almost 40,000. And some of the talks they've hosted have had thousands. The maximum is 5,000. So they would like hit the maximum amount of, like you said, like listeners, like people listening to the conversations. And many of them were from mainland China. And at first he would tell people not to record, that this is off the record. But then after a while, after say one of their speakers, she found out that her talk was being recorded by someone who is sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party. After some of those incidents, they decided that they can't even expect anyone to not record. Like they tell people now at the beginning of conversations, just assume that this is not private, like this is being monitored. You know, that's a risk you're taking by using the app, especially if you live not just in China, but in any country that has low levels of press freedom where criticizing authorities are a crime. So that's definitely a question that many people have tried to pose to Clubhouse founders. I sent them messages asking about level of encryption, what they're going to do about these reports, but they haven't so far provided detailed security protocols, and they haven't responded to the very specific like China focus or how about your users in authoritarian countries questions yet.
Right, but there are concerns that this could be a dangerous app for dissidents and citizens from countries like China, where cyber surveillance and censorship is the norm. What are the safety and security risks? Could you talk a little bit about the features? You mentioned the capability to record. Obviously, there's monitoring.
Yeah, so one of the things is Clubhouse encourages people to use your real names and real phone numbers. So just by itself, by registering, it's pretty easy to track you. And China doesn't really need to do all that because it's monitoring technology is so sophisticated. It has voice recognition. So the concern is not that maybe people think that it's going to be like a mass arrest of anyone who ever logged on to Clubhouse in China, but that this information has been recorded. It might be used in the future. And we saw this with other apps like Twitter and Facebook. Years after a Chinese person posted on Twitter, they might get arrested for something, maybe for like writing a letter criticizing political system in China or something. And then literally I would see the prosecutor pull up tweets that this person wrote years ago as evidence that they were trying to, divide Chinese society, endanger national security. So someone's tweets end up being part of the arsenal of evidence Chinese authorities can use to persecute a critic.
Right. And now there's voice recordings that could be utilized for the same purposes.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be hard to be like, oh, that wasn't me, when you have your real name, phone number, and your voice.
Right. And like you said, the founders haven't really responded to the issues so far. But at the same time, this is something that's growing really fast, right? I know other tech giants have already started work on similar apps. And these are the kinds of questions and concerns that are going to have to be addressed at some point.
It's just really wide-ranging on these concerns because we've seen big social media companies take so much heat for their role in having their platforms be the facilitator for misinformation, disinformation during elections, and questioning to what extent they should just let it all free. Right now, it's all free on Clubhouse. I think there's been far-right groups using it because they like that it's completely uncensored and free. So another concern is that it's been small so far, but as it gets bigger and bigger, how will you prevent it from just kind of spiraling for there to be lots of trolling and abuse and harassment and people just recording it, taking what you say out of context, remixing it, posting it outside of the app. So these are concerns that people have raised in recent weeks as the app has exploded in popularity and the diversity of users from all around the world.
Thanks so much, Joanna. You explained it to me really well. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I was talking to Toronto Star reporter Joanna Chu. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Sabai Tazaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Mudhir. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by SoCalled, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.